So I finally managed to get both of you in the same room to discuss everything Rockpit. And there's only one place we can start with, and we briefly touched on it in last month's podcast. Mark, where did it all begin?
Well, it's a good question, really. 2009 officially was the start of the Rockpit, but a couple of years before that, maybe, I toyed with the idea. I'd seen a few websites out there that I thought were great, but didn't quite sort of have the music I liked on there. And I'll name them because they were great websites and still are. There was one called Sleaze Rocks, which is basically Sunset Strip music, late 80s rock. And it was done by this guy called Skid, and it was brilliant. And I mentioned that last time. And there's another one done by a guy down in Tasmania called Andrew McNeese called melodicrock.com. And that was great as well for melodic music. And I thought, well, I like both those styles of music, and I like a heck of a lot of other stuff as well. So why not create a site that does all that? And I searched for about a year or so and couldn't find anything remotely like what I was after doing. And then, of course, as you do, you think, actually, it would be great to have a site. Found an IT guy. Well, I actually worked with an IT guy called Colin, who, in those days, we couldn't just pull WordPress down and stuff like that. You had to code your own site. So he did all the hard work, and I told him what to do. And then found someone else at a gig. And really the emphasis, though, was on just starting something that was new. We knew how hard it was going to be. We had no contacts, no PR people, didn't know anyone in any bands, but we thought, oh, Facebook's there, and MySpace, which was still around in those days. We can contact people, someone will talk to us, and then once someone else starts talking to us, maybe we'll get a few free tickets to gigs and stuff like that. So it started off really slow, and like you do when you start something off, you're getting with the wrong people, and I had someone who just was in it for themselves with me at the start, ripped me off, didn't contribute any money, and then ran off to do something themselves. And eventually I got tipped off by one of their best mates that they were going to start up their own website anyway, so I just pulled the pin on them like you do, and never looked back since. And that really was a relatively short period for the Rockpit. It was only about 2 years, and everything's been pretty positive since then.
So 2009, at what point did you actually start things, getting things started?
What was the day? Yeah. The very first interview I did.
No, before that, like the idea and then actually putting it into place. Like, was it like a year before that or two?
No, it was about July.
Okay, so it's quite short then.
Yeah, and it was almost done by the time I had a very long conversation with George Lynch in the Amplify bar when he was about to play. And that night I said, oh yeah, I've got this idea and I'm going to do this, and I've got most of the web design done and all this sort of thing. And he goes, just do it. So I thought, yeah, fair enough, I'll just do it. So I got George Lynch to thank for the actual saying, and then within 2 weeks for first interview.
Wow.
That's it.
Up and running.
Wow. Which was Danny Vaughan?
And Danny Vaughan, who's become a friend over the years, was my first ever interview, and I've interviewed him many times over the years, and he's one of the nicest blokes you can meet, and it's meeting people like that sort of make it worth it. People who are supremely talented musicians, but also really, really good people as well. And I'm pleased to say that in the rock community, there's a lot of them out there. So
yeah,
I can count on the fingers of 2 and a bit hands the number of bad interviews I've had over the years, but most of them have been brilliant. But so that's how it started.
Yeah.
And then when this gentleman here got on board, that's when it really started.
It took a little bit. I mean, it was a slow process. When I first came in, it was just a review here, and eventually there was Tanya that pushed me into, you got to start talking to some of these people. I'd done interviews before. I had been involved in the music for a while before that. Ran a lot of fanzines and Metallica fan sites and stuff like that. So I'd interviewed quite a few people before that. So I already had the chops there, so to speak, But to interview people outside of one particular band or style of music, and getting involved. And my first interview actually was phone interview was John Garcia, legend from Caius and Unita and those bands, So just straight into it right away,
Yeah.
So and there was no looking back. After that it was just sort of like snowballing from there. But it took a little bit. It was only like a sporadic kind of like a review here kind of thing, before I started to get into it.
Because what interests me about your story is that you run the sort of metal side of this, but you've still got a heck of a lot of rock roots there. And
my first foray into music was hard rock. I mean, it was sort of bluesy hard rock, kind of like Dire Straits and things like that, and then eventually got into more harder. Eventually, just became heavier and heavier. But I never forgot, or I don't stop listening to all the stuff that I started out with. So it's been
a nice eclectic.
My range of style is quite diverse, I think, but there's a certain thing that's always, you kind of have that probably as well, when there's always a certain thing you need to have in each certain band or whatever, and that's sourced from your roots, from where you first initially started listening to music, so I always find the hooks and the blues and the riffs is the most important part. If I don't have that, it doesn't do anything for me,
So interesting. Let's take it back further from before Rockpit start. And what was your early musical loves, Mark? What did you start?
Well, it's quite interesting for me because the first music I can ever remember listening to was Motown, and to this very day, my favourite song of all time is a Motown song, and I don't think that'll ever change. But when I was young, the first 3 albums I ever bought were New York Dolls by New York Dolls, Alice Cooper, Love It to Death, and Plastic Letters by Blondie. So you've already got a bit of variety in there. You got sort of like the glam rock, you got I don't know, I always saw Blondie as a bit of a rock band really, and
I think so, yeah.
And Alice Cooper. And if you and just to cut you off before you ask me about my guilty pleasures, I'd still say that was it was Blondie. It'd still be Blondie and Motown. Like I love the Motown sound. Probably one of my favourite musicians ever is James Jamerson, the bassist, who sort of created that whole Motown sound. But hard rock took me at an early age. My best mate's brother had a huge collection. Thin Lizzy, Bob Seger, all the American bands like Molly Hatchet, stuff like that, Frank Marino, Mahogany Rush, all the really weird ones, plus bands like Budgie and Nazareth and stuff like that. So 70s rock was really where it all started. And then I discovered, on the same day, Kiss and Angel. Both on Casablanca Records. Went down to the local record store. Used to be able to buy these import records where they cut the corners off. 99 pence. I had Princely Sum of £4, and I think I bought Ace Frehley's solo album, the new Kiss one, which I think at the time would have been Dynasty or Dynasty, as they would say. Angel's Sinful, which I still think is one of the most perfect albums ever made, and The Runaways, made in Japan. So yeah, I haven't sadly got any of those albums anymore, but I've got those first 3, but I don't know what happened to those ones over the years. But that's where it all started for me. I imagine everyone's got similar stories. The first gig I ever saw was UFO on a school trip.
Yeah.
Went to Greece and UFO were playing Athens, and that was the fateful day when Phil had a bit of a tantrum or a breakdown, depending on what you read on stage, and disappeared after a few songs. And the first riot that I ever saw then soon happened slightly after that. And then I got back home, and that week Tina Turner was playing, just before she went huge with Private Dancer. And in the same theatre the week after, Girls' School played.
Oh wow!
So I've just been over to Australia for the first time. So it was a bit of as much as I could get in those days, I guess, really. Yeah. But wonderful.
Yeah. That's a question that I ask almost every artist I interview is, how did you get into music? And every story is different, and it's always fascinating how everyone gets into it. It's
for me, it was my dad's record collection and my mate's brother's record collection.
Almost always, there's always a family thing in there where it's like the sibling or the dad, or whatever, that has the record collection, and you sort of discover it through that. But
what about yourself? What was your early musical?
I mean, it's been widely sort of printed now that I've sort of done interviews and stuff like that, where Dire Straits was the band that sort of launched me into it. But they were the band that got me passionate about music. Before that, it was almost a casual affair. So there was a lot of discovering. There was a lot of brief stuff involved because my dad is Scottish, so he obviously brought over a lot of the records, like Status Quo and bands like The Sweet and I don't know if you know a band called Smokey, I think. Yeah. And all these bands were like, some of them were sort of more glammy and a little bit more sort of AC/DC-esque. I love the guitar aspect of it. But and then there was a lot of Aussie bands in there that was sort of just going through, like In Excess and Mental as Anything and all these bands that, that were coming out in the early 80s, So, but it wasn't until Dire Straits that I heard that Mark Knopfler riff, those guitar licks, and just went, oh, that's what I want to listen to, So, and that's where it snowballed from there. And just, a lot of 80s rock. It's a big Aerosmith, Guns N' Roses, Def Leppard fan, those particular bands, and then obviously a lot of the glam stuff that came out, and then every style that came through, even the grunge stuff and the alternative rock, and then a lot of the metal stuff came in afterwards, But it's still, every time, Guns N' Roses or whatever come through, I just, it takes me back to, my childhood, So,
yeah. No, it's pretty cool.
Yeah. What about yourself?
Well, it's a bit weird because not coming from a family with any brothers and my dad was into things like Dean Martin and Johnny Mathis and Neil Diamond. There was no rock in...
Neil Diamond's...
Neil Diamond's king
Neil
of rock
Diamond was in my household, so it was a little bit plain
but
there.
There wasn't a lot of other... I remember my parents taking me to see Shawaddy Waddy when I was about 12. And it was my first gig and I was like, wow, this is just cool, the whole live thing. And then... it was a few years later that I started listening to the Friday Rock Show, Tommy Vance.
Yeah, fantastic. When
the whole of the British rock industry used to be condensed in 2 hours on a Friday, late at night. That's all you could hear. And it's when I first heard Iron Maiden on there, and that just hooked me, and became a massive Maiden fan. And then, obviously, going to places like Donington and seeing the bands that were on the bill, and Thunder and Choir Boys and Poison and just everything, Aerosmith, and then... being lucky to have all these bands play on one day on one stage.
Yeah.
And it was the best of the best back then. It was when Donington was 5-6 quality acts.
And I think because we got so little of it as well in those days, it was all more special. You'd wait all year for something.
You would wait for the announcement. And when Kerrang announced the first headline, you'd be like, oh, who else is going to be on that bill? And as the bill got announced, you'd be like, oh my God, it's like better than last year. And then... and then that was it. And then I just started following bands, and then, it was only until I kind of met you guys that my kind of music had got a bit stale. I was just waiting for my favourite bands to release new music.
Yeah, yep.
Instead of going in and listening to new music. But since I've been with the Rockpit for 15, 18 months, it's been hearing some incredible music.
The Underground still has, in my opinion, the best music out there. It's just that people just seem to be attached to the bigness of certain bands, and they want to just hear those songs, and once you start branching out and you really listen to the music, there's so much great stuff.
Some of these independent artists that are producing their own stuff, like the guy we saw last night supporting John Stevens, Taylor Sheridan, independent artist, writes his own acoustic music. There was some fantastic stuff, and everyone in the room, when he came on, there was a lot of muttering and talking. As soon as he started playing, the room was boom, they were listening to him. And it's all funded by himself, and so many bands and artists out there doing that. And it's one thing I love is the fact that we're out there hearing their music and trying to give them any sort of step up we can help with, so that everyone can hear how good it is.
And I guess that was the main thing about the Rockpit for me. It was not just about covering the big bands, it was telling people about the little bands that were really good. And I think we do that a lot. If you look at the coverage, half of it's big names and half of it's things that are great that people really should.
We kind of use the big names in a way to say, okay, you like these guys, how about these guys over here as well? You know what I mean? It's almost like a gateway to some of the smaller bands, and I hope that a lot of the readers kind of do that, where they kind of read about their favourite band and all of a sudden they're discovering another band somewhere else,
And promoting independent Australian rock, and especially local rock. It's pretty hard to get a voice if you're from Perth, Western Australia. But Well, I mean, there's some bands out there who've made it. In Excess, a little tiny band that came out of Perth
Yeah.
a few years ago. Sort of made a bit of an impact.
They did a bit of an impact.
A few others as well. But,
yeah.
Mr. Bon Scott, I think, was from around these parts.
Yes, it's been a wonderful. What's the word I'm looking for? A massive section of rock. World international rock is based from here in Australia. Some great influences that have come through. And I've said before, I've had the pleasure of talking to people like Angry Anderson and the Brewsters, and talking to them about that old Vanda and Young story is just incredible. And how many bands around the world sort of took it off that kind of idea.
Yeah, that's great.
Sound.
It's great.
So we've talked about your musical influences, and the Rockpit has had so much content over the years, but this is going to be really difficult for you both. We'll start with Mark. Favourite interview?
I knew you were going to start with that. It's impossible. I clocked up 600 interviews the other day in the 9 years, which is a heck of a lot of talking to people. Lots of multiples in there. I haven't really got a favourite one, you know. I can tell you about ones I was scared about before they started. I can tell you, and the ones that were really bad really stick in my mind as well. But obviously, I'm not going to name those ones. But I mean, some of the most interesting ones for me. I mean, I love catching up with people that I've spoken to before, because when you interview someone for the first time, it's hard to know what to say. You know, you've got to talk about the new tour or the new product or the new whatever it may be. But then you sort of get free rein to talk about anything. But once you talk to someone again for the second time and third time and stuff like that, it's more like having a conversation with someone. You get to know so much more about them doing that.
And those come out far more interesting to read as well when it feels like a conversation when you're reading it that way.
So I love those. So I love catching up with Danny Vaughan. I love catching up with Danny from Thunder as well. I've spoken to him about 5 times over the years, and every time it's something different. And both are really great people. But I've really enjoyed talking to Mark Knight, who was one of the original guitarists in the band Bang Tango. He's become a friend. He does very different music these days, but he's a lovely bloke. One of my favourites though, I think it's got to be a guy called Ron Young from Little Caesar. He's a singer of that band who last year I think it was signed to an Australian label, put out an album called 8, which is just as good as their original stuff. But that was great. As far as highlights though, as a big Blondie fan, I've only ever got to interview one of Blondie, and hopefully I'm going to talk to him again this year because he's coming out again. Clem Burke, the drummer, one of the funniest guys you can ever speak to. But I think the interview I got most scared about was Ace Frehley. Because I used to paint my face like Ace Frehley when I was about 7 or 8 years old. So the first time, I've spoken to him a few times now, but the first time, I never get nervous before an interview. And I treat every interview like you're having a conversation with a friend. Yeah. And I think that's the way to go. If you put people on pedestals, you get an awful interview out of it. But I was so wound up before I spoke to Ace Frehley for the first time. And then there's another interview I did that I always remember where the person who was putting us through said, I hope you enjoy your interview. Just let you know, he has hung up on the last 2 people he's spoken to. and that's like the most perfect introduction for an interview, isn't it? You think, oh my God, what do I say? How do I keep him on the phone? But I love feedback as well, and probably our most read interview ever as far as numbers concerned was the David Coverdale interview. And I did say David Coverdale there because he chased me around Twitter for a while because I shortened his first name a notch, and David's hopefully I'll get to speak to him again one day and apologise again, but for a few days I found myself apologising on Twitter, and he kept saying other things, and as he did, the interview just got read more and more, so it was worked out well. But obviously iconic, and some of the big names as well that you get a chance to speak to are fantastic. But I always think it's the people you've got a connection to that you have the best.
Yeah,
best
definitely. Yeah.
When you really relate to the music.
Yeah.
And what about yours with your interviews?
So I get asked all the time what my favourite interview is or highlights or whatever, and there's two that stick in my mind for different reasons. I think the biggest interview that I've ever done, and for very much the same reason that you had with Ace Frehley, there was definitely a lot of hesitation around it, is Dave Mustaine from Megadeth. And he has a certain reputation, as everyone knows. And that was part of why it was such a scary moment. I mean, the interview went fine, of course, but there was always something there in the back of my mind. He could just, lose it, whatever. If I asked the wrong question to ask him about Metallica, no, I shouldn't do that, But it was fine, but that was definitely one of the highlights for sure. But as far as my favourite interview goes, it's actually a guitarist named Rob Cavastani from a San Francisco thrash metal band called Death Angel, who were hugely influential back in the 80s. They came out in the second wave of the thrash after Metallica and all those guys. And funny enough, they're good friends with the guys in Metallica as well. And me and Rob share a common heritage in that we're both half Filipino. Oh. And so half of our first interview, because I've spoken to him like 3 times now ever since, and that was 2013. And I reckon half the interview was just us talking about, where's your mum from? What's your mum's surname? All this kind of stuff, And we had to end up editing that out because it just wasn't readable. No one cares about that stuff, you know what I mean? So, and then because of that first half of the conversation, the rest of the interview just went beautiful, And I've spoken to him 2 more times since then, and we always hit it off, So, but that first one always has been my favourite interview ever. Yeah. So, yeah.
And that's the cool thing, because we all record them, you do get what the readers get to read. There's so much is left out sometimes where it is totally boring to them, but it's so unique sometimes.
Well, it's only edited. I mean, one of the things, and the reason we do the he said, they said type interview setup is because I always like to put exactly what they say down there.
Exactly.
So there is editing in that you'll leave out certain things that were said that aren't necessarily relevant, but as far as the word for word bit, we just try and stick to it.
For that content is always word for word.
Yeah. Keeps everything in context as well, so nothing is taken out of,
No,
so
it's cool.
It is cool. But there's been so many highlights. I mean, everyone's got their own personal picks. You must have already a couple that's stood out already.
Yeah, I mean, I was thrown in at the deep end after being told by Mark, you'll just interview someone local, and then thrown in with Blackstone Cherry. I was terrified. I remember doing it here at my work and did it in my office, and everyone had gone home, and I was terrified. But I think even during the interview, I told him, this is my first one. I'm pretty nervous. I'm sorry. And he was so great. He was just like, man, we'll just get through it together.
Yeah.
And,
I have tried to look after you and give you some interesting ones.
and to pick a favourite would be so difficult. So difficult already, because I have had some really good ones. To talk to Andrew Farriss the other week was just incredible. After the number of songs he helped to write in Australian music history, it was just incredible. Angry Anderson, but John Stevens again, fantastic. They're all wonderful.
What about worst interview?
I've had one that will remain nameless, but the person didn't really want to answer my little general ones at the end, where I asked, who would you like to have dinner with from the music world? I don't like to talk to someone while I'm eating dinner. So, okay, we'll move on.
I think I know who you're talking about.
What album did you last listen to? Well, I don't listen to anyone else's music when I'm...
Yeah, I know exactly who you're talking about.
And it was very difficult, but I went to see him when he came to Perth, went and met him after the show, gave me a lovely handshake, shared my interview on Facebook. So he was obviously happy with it. And it was a good interview. We talked about a lot of early stuff and things. It was really interesting, but it was hard. I didn't know where to go with those answers. So I just sort of smiled and carried on. And that's been my hardest one.
That's what you got to do. I mean, some of the worst ones I've had have been the ones like that, where I remember there was, and 2 of them I've refused to print because the band was just so unprofessional and so bad. But interestingly enough, they were both bands that no one would have ever heard of. I gave them feedback, and I gave them a bit of advice on what to do, and one of them was just one-word answers. If you're talking to someone, you're asking them questions, they've got a new album out there and a tour that they're trying to promote, and they're sat there giving you one-word answers, and you're giving them a variety of questions.
Those are probably the worst ones, when they make you work a little bit harder and then they don't seem interested. Those are the most difficult ones. But there's been a few shockers that I've been involved with, definitely. One that actually was, I won't name Well, I probably can, because there's been some back and forth in the band, and the guy that ended up leaving the band, he left the band literally not long after I did the interview with him. Like at the time I didn't know, and then looking back and went, huh?
Was it down to you?
No, it wasn't. No. Well, I hope not anyway. But it just made sense when you look back and I go, oh, that's why he wasn't in a good mood to do the interview, because he was obviously So that happened. That was actually the former drummer of a Swedish band, Amana Marth, actually.
Oh, okay.
And now they've been going back and forth online, saying this and that. You know how it is sometimes. So interesting how that's sort of come about.
Yeah, I mean, I was very lucky that I've been friends with Lips from Anvil for a few years. And before I did my first interview, I actually private messaged him and said, this is really awkward for me to ask you, but what's been your best and worst interviews? What as an artist do you not like? So I had a kind of few pointers from a guy in the media who'd been interviewed so many times. And I remember him texting back and saying, do you know what, sometimes the best interviews I've had are nothing to do with Anvil. He said, they've asked me about my school or what my beliefs are. And he said, just go with your gut feeling.
Yeah.
And one who reminds me, Susie Quattro, who I recently interviewed this year. When she started the conversation, she sounded off, and I thought she must have had a hard interview before me. And I was like, how do I get... And the one question I asked her that won her over was, she said, have you been listening to the album? I said, I've had it on all weekend. And she went, oh, have you really? And I went, oh, wow. I said, and I went through all the tracks. And then you just heard her change. She went, oh my God, you have heard it. She said, good boy. And she knew I'd really listened to it. And that was it. After that, we just had the most incredible chat.
I think the honesty is the most important part. As long as you're honest with them and know what's
That's
up,
it.
they're okay with it.
And if someone's going to send me, if I'm interviewing, doesn't matter whether it's Susie Quattro, whether it's a local band, if I'm interviewing them about their album, then I'll have the courtesy to listen to that album.
Of course, yeah.
You see these big entertainment reporters on certain channels who get these wonderful big stars in, and they hold the album up and go and buy this, it's great.
And
they've
no
not even
idea.
written the questions that they're asking. And we have the pleasure of being able to write our own questions, listen to their music, and then ask what we want to ask.
It is hard though. I mean, going back to that one where the person who introduced me said, he's hung up on the last two people he's spoken to. That was when I thought, all right, I'm going to have to ask my best question first.
Yeah. And
when I did, instead of the usual, hello, here you are, this is what you're supporting, that sort of thing, you go, interesting.
Yeah. But sometimes it's weird that you'll ask
really
the promo questions or whatever they're promoting. And then you kind of get a gauge of whether they're interested or not. And then as soon as you switch it up and change to something unrelated that they don't necessarily get asked a lot, all of a sudden you can hear in the tone, it's like it's changed, and it's like, okay, let's stick with this instead, Sometimes you can write out a bunch of questions, but sometimes it's just not going to work unless you know how to gauge with the person on the other end whether they're going to be interested or not.
I fall for that every time. I write 20 questions for every interview, and I think probably about 3 times out of the last 100 I've even looked at the questions.
Yeah, same, yeah. I stopped doing them a long time ago. I almost wing it in a way. But.
Yeah, I've had a couple of interesting ones where I've prepped for Scott Gorham recently. I had some fantastic Thin Lizzy questions, and then we got a little email through from the PR saying he doesn't really want to talk about Thin Lizzy, so I was like, right, back to the old drawing board, that's that page gone. And in fact, it was Scott that started talking about Thin Lizzy during the interview, at the same as Andrew Farriss. I didn't want to deliberately ask him anything about In Excess, and I waited for him to bring it in. And as soon as he did it in, we could bring.
But that happens quite often. Do not talk about this, and then it's
they end up talking about it. Yeah,
let them bring it up, and then it's sort of fair
exactly.
Yeah. But it's been interesting so far, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot more. So we've talked about some of the great people you've interviewed. Who haven't you interviewed? Who would be on your top list? Say, give me your top 3 of who you haven't chatted to yet.
There's one in particular I've been chasing for a long time, and it almost happened last year, and scheduling and all that didn't make it work. But I've been wanting to talk to this guy named Jeff Waters from a band called Annihilator. He's a Canadian musician, absolutely one of the top guitarists in the world. Such an underrated player. And no one knows who the hell they are. I mean, there are some thrash metal fans from back in the 80s that know who Annihilator are. They had a few sort of small hits, in the late 80s, early 90s. But I've followed that band for years, and every album is just phenomenal. And it's like, how come this band is not bigger than they are, I've been trying to chase him for years, ever since I started doing stuff for the Rockpit, and it's never worked out. He's a busy guy, very busy man. So
he's one on
definitely,
your list.
yeah. There's a few in there as well, but he's definitely number one at this stage. So
yeah. Who would you have apart from Debbie Harry?
Well, Debbie Harry, I've got a story about Debbie Harry. I've actually met two of the people that would be in my top 3 list, but I've never had the chance to interview them. The first one was Steve Marriott, who was born on the same day as me, so I've always felt that sort of like little bit of extra connection there. But I think he's just one of the most talented songwriters ever. Small Faces, Humble Pie, and his solo stuff. And when I was a kid, just started uni, I went down to a bar in the place where I lived, and he was playing there, but just with his little solo band. And I was too nervous to speak to him, and after he was halfway through the set, he came up to the bar, stood at the bar, got himself a pint, had a smoke, because you could smoke in bars in those days, that's how long ago it was. And I just stood there looking at him, and I just couldn't say anything. I stood there on my pint thinking, I really want to talk to Steve Marriott, because he's like a legend, but couldn't say a thing. And he just like turned to me and smiled and gave me a nod, and that was enough. And I absolutely lost for words. And then after that, I thought, I never want to be in that situation again where I get lost for words. So my Debbie Harry story was Blondie were playing Melbourne in the front row for second night, and they're next to this couple, and they said, look, if Debbie leaves while they're playing the last song, and if you come out with us through the back door, you'll see her get in the car and all that and go off. So we did all that, and sure enough, exactly what they said happened. And she came up, all I had was ticket stub, so she signed my ticket stub for me. And I just felt these words coming out of my mouth that I've regretted ever since, where I said, I've loved you since I was 8 years old. And I don't know whether it's a look of horror or shock or what it was in her face, but she just sort of like nodded and smiled. And that was it. And I
probably got pretty used to it. So maybe gets that lot. Maybe
she must think that
you are actually on the Blondie official site as one to watch for at gigs.
Yeah. But I guess if there was anyone, I think. I mean, all the big names of the past, who wouldn't want to interview someone like Hendrix or Jim Morrison?
Of course, yeah.
But for me, I think it'd probably be Mark Bolan. I bought an album years and years ago, and after about having it for 10 years, I realised it was actually signed by him. Wow. Because it had been signed in biro, pen, way before Sharpies were invented or anything like that. And I think for what he did as well in the 70s and that sort of music, everyone loves David Bowie, but for me it was always Mark Bolan. Yeah. So I think he'd be the third one.
Cool. Oh, that's good. Some good names there.
Yeah.
You must have quite a few of them.
And you, Shawaddy Waddy, obviously.
Well, sadly, I got to see Shawaddy Waddy about 9 years ago, and it wasn't the same. They played at the Working Men's Club round from where I live. Mine aren't. Joe Bonamassa interests me. I've always wanted to chat to him. But someone else, you spoke about Danny from Thunder. I'd love to chat to Luke, and it nearly happened at Christmas, didn't it? And it just fell through at the last minute because he was about to travel. Luke never seems to do many interviews, so I'd love to have a chat with Luke Morley. And the other one is, I'd love to chat to someone from Iron Maiden, but not Bruce. Dave Murray. You never see Dave Murray doing interviews, or Adrian Smith. So I'd love to do a chat with one of them two. They'd probably be my 3 at the moment.
So if you're out there,
yes, Dave or Adrian, or David, maybe. Yes, so there's plenty. I know.
Oh, here's stacks.
And the one thing about the Rockpit that amazes me is that every time an email comes in, there's still a surprise at the end. Would you like to interview so and so? And you're like, oh my god, what an incredible honour to be able to chat to this person. Or, you know.
It's changed a lot since we started. We were scrambling around for can we send you some questions by email? Will you please answer them? And then when you've got your first 10 on the site, you think it's fantastic. We've got 10 interviews up there. And then the first year you might do, I think we did 52 interviews the first year, which was amazing because it was one a week. and then it was 80, and then it was 120, and then it just kept going. And now I think we're probably doing one every 2 or 3 days, probably. So
if not more than that, because we've got so many other people that should be something we should talk about. All the other people that's been involved over the years.
I was going to say, it's obviously not just the two. There's been a lot of man hours gone into it from other people, reviewers and photographers and interviewers, and
all over the place as well.
Yeah.
All over Australia and the US, we get a lot more coverage now than what we used to, which is amazing because it covers a lot of bands that we wouldn't necessarily look at, and then you sort of read the review or whatever, and you go, oh, maybe I should go check them out, you know. So
yeah, definitely. Are there any names that you'd like to throw out that have been on a sort of a roll of honour board of the Rockpit over the years that you've had coming in and helping out and doing interviews? And
I mean, what, the current team or people in the past?
People in the past.
I've already been dealing with the ones that are still with us, so Mark's more the ones that sort of work with a lot of the guys that have sort of come and gone over the years.
Yeah, I mean, there's been some people made some great contributions over the years, but I always feel hard like reading off a list because you're always going to miss someone. So rather than just I'll just thank everyone. Then that way I don't.
That's a safe bet.
Don't lose anyone.
Yeah,
but there's some great photographers that have been taking some unbelievable shots, and some people that are quite creative in their writing as well, you know. So it's a great bunch of people we've got on board, you know. Everyone sort of has the same thing. They're all passionate about, you know, what they do, you know.
Yeah.
So
Go to the website and have a look at the list of people we've got on there. There's so many people, and I've almost met all of them.
Yeah. It's interesting. So this is where we are for the first 10 years. Where can you see the next 10 years going?
Well, that's what we're working on at the moment, is, you know, expanding and sort of bringing in more business, I guess, you know, looking at it from a more business point of view, because it's at some point because it's so time consuming, we need to start making it more worth our time, you know, because unfortunately, because of the way that the industry is, I mean, there was a time when journalism and magazines and stuff were making money and you could pay your staff and all this and that. And a lot of that, much like music itself, has disappeared. So now everyone's just volunteering their time. But when you're doing this amount of interviews and going to gigs every week, you know, it's only so many hours in a day, you know. So at some point you've got to start looking at the business and going, well, how can we make this more worth our time and also help still promote, you know, all the music that we love, you know.
So yeah, I mean, we do a bit of management now, don't we? We do some PR type services. We can help bands out with websites and stuff like that. A lot of web design. I mean, that's something we're interested in getting more into. But I think for us mainly it's those live shows. So we've got the 2 birthday party shows coming up in Melbourne and Perth.
Exciting.
Hope to see a lot of people out in Perth, especially. I know the lineup we've got. Everyone should get out and see that show. But to me, the one of the things that blew me away was the lineup that we've got for our Melbourne show. Like I couldn't have picked full bands. I'd pay to go and see that if we weren't putting it going on.
Well, that's good to know, because it's $12 pre-sale if you'd like to get tickets. I can sort you somehow.
But yeah, I mean, what a great lineup! 4 bands that are fantastic. 4
incredible Melbourne bands, and we've also got the wonderful Silent Deeds who are flying over with us from Perth, which for me was always the big romance thing of the 2 venues. You know, I still always remember Live Aid, and I talk about this. Phil Collins playing Wembley and then flying to Philadelphia to play later that day. Silent Deeds playing Perth, coming across to Melbourne to play there and represent WA on the bill, which is fantastic.
A great band as well.
Yeah.
I mean,
they'll hold their own on that.
And that's the best thing about music, isn't it? You find a band like that and you think, wow, these guys are great. Yeah. More people.
I know they're very excited to play, and that's great for them as well. They've never played Melbourne before. Yeah. They're amongst some incredible artists on that bill.
But there's no point just doing a couple of birthday shows. So the idea is that we'll keep at it. We'll keep putting the best musicians out there locally, and then we've got quite a few people talking to us at the minute internationally about coming over. So we don't want to compete with anyone. We want to put on music that we love, and we want to do it with people who want to come and play for us. So,
and because we're in Perth and so isolated, and you know, there's some bands that struggle to find out how to get out of Perth, you know, and I always felt that we could be the gateway to the rest of the country, and then obviously to the world as well, because we do get skipped out in a lot of tours and stuff like that. And if we can somehow make that happen, so it's where bands will start to come back to Perth again, that's what we want to do.
But it all depends on you guys out there. So you've got to get out. If it's raining or the footy's on, or just forget about it and just get some live music.
We do need to support the acts and show them that the recent Perth Rocks Festival we talked about, wonderful support, over 300 people at the peak of it. So the fans are there and they are voting with their feet and coming out and seeing these things. So
they obviously want something like that, and on a regular basis as well.
Yeah.
And I think the importance is that the quality of the music in Perth is fantastic. It's there to match Melbourne. Melbourne scene's brilliant. Perth has got some fantastic bands. We touched on some of the interviews and the wonderful people you've managed to talk to, but let's talk about some of the best and worst gigs you've seen, because we've all had best and worst gigs.
It's hard to pin down one gig that stood out, but I don't know. So many. The first one I ever went to was quite big. It was Def Leppard on the Adrenalize tour. I was 13 years old, I think, at the time, and just blown away by how good they were, and just the fact that I was at a show for the first time and just seeing that, hearing the music that you've grown up with and seeing it live on stage for the first time, And then after that, I just started focusing more on the local stuff. Yeah. Tickets at the time it was at the old entertainment centre before it closed down. It was 8,000 people capacity or something like that, I think.
Yeah, 8 or 10. I never remember.
And but tickets were obviously expensive, So going to see a local show for $5-10 was more my thing, So, I'll never forget it. Seeing them and I haven't seen them since. Every time they come through, I keep missing them. I'm always doing something or whatever, So.
Any worse shows? Have you been to one and gone, I was really looking forward to that, but
I don't know. I'm not sure. There's been ones where the sound was off. I don't know if that was necessarily to the band's fault. Nothing's really stood out. Obviously, they weren't memorable. That's why I don't remember them.
I have got one, and it was the NIB Stadium, and it was Meatloaf's last visit here, and it was. I got there 10 minutes late, and people were leaving. As I was going in, and I thought, this isn't a good sign.
Well, it's funny, isn't it? Because Perth, Burswood Dome, I always remember, was an awful place to see a band.
God, yeah.
When that was there, I remember the first band I ever went to see in Perth was Deep Purple playing Burswood Dome, and we were sat up in the stands, and the sound was that bad, I asked for my money back and they just gave me it back.
Really?
So,
I must have agreed.
But best gigs, so many. I could probably reel off 24, I think.
Yeah, it's just hard to pin it down.
One of my favourites was when the Black Crowes first toured the UK. They supported a band called the Dogs the Moor, who were one of my favourite bands and still are, and the Black Crowes became another one of my favourite bands. But just seeing a double bill like that back in the day was incredible. And a band called Love Hate, who should have been absolutely huge, used to come to the UK regularly, and me and my mate always used to go, and it was always a complete party when they played. They were such great nights. But it was so many. Doningtons. I mean, what Donington do you pick? 86 to 92, I think I went to, and but
the White Snake year was very. That was a good one for me.
I think my favourite was the White Snake Aerosmith. Being a
Poison.
big Aerosmith fan, Poison, Thunder,
Choir Boys, Thunder.
Choir Boys,
yeah. It was a good year.
Yeah.
In fact, I found my ticket stub the other day because it was the 30th anniversary or whatever.
I stole one of the actual original posters for that.
Done that a few times.
I've still got the programme. I'll have to flick through the programme. But it's there's been some highlights. And we were, another one that's too hard to talk about is albums, because every time we get an album to review, you go, wow, this is my album of the year. Nailed on. That's got to be my album. And then another album turns up a week later and you go, oh my God, there's another one. Yeah. I've got at the moment 4 or 5 contenders for my album of the year.
I've got this coming together. So in fact, I got one in my inbox just a couple of days ago, and I played it so many because it was a streaming one, unfortunately, and they will give me a download eventually. It's just restricted to only certain press. but they'll have a restriction when you stream it. You can only play it 3 times on the radio.
Really?
I said, I need another copy, please. Can you send it through? Because I want to review it, And that's Toxic Holocaust. They've got a new album coming out, and they're a band that's just no one's heard of them. Unless
that is cool. There is, and this year the music's been very strong again. It's,
some great albums already. Some great blues albums, some great rock albums out there, but
and not just internationally. Australia has had some real strong ones this year.
Yes, so we should start to think about that. It's August already, so I think I'm pretty sure what my top 2 or 3 are, but we'll there's a few months to go.
Yeah, there is. So there's plenty of chance to get some more quality in.
And of course, the favourite album of all time is Impossible.
Yeah, too hard.
Yeah.
There's a few that you can list on there. Even just picking a band and going, what's your favourite album? It's just,
Even a top 5's hard to pick, I find. I've tried to do a top 10 and then I go, oh, what about that one?
No. And it changes over the years. Like, for me, Metallica's always been the go-to band. It has been for a long time now, for a good 20 years. Even though I've been a fan for them for longer than that. And there was a period when I loved the Black Album. Then I thought, oh, maybe I like the Justice album. Then, but consistently, it's been Master of Puppets, the 3rd album that they put out in '86. And I keep going back to it and going, why am I keep going back to this album all the time? And I realise it has to be my favourite album, despite the fact that there are certain songs on other albums that I kind of favour more. You know what I mean? So it's I think you need an extended amount of time, and if you still love that album, then you go, that has to be my favourite album.
Yeah.
But if you just only do it after a couple of years, it's like it's too early to say,
Yeah, but it's always the albums you grow up with that last longest and stay longest as well. I think because you it's like I was thinking the other day, I probably couldn't sing a song all the way through that I've heard in the last 10 years. But as soon as something comes on the radio I haven't heard for 20 years, I knew when
you know it straight away. That's funny, that.
You know.
I chuck on Def Leppard's Hysteria album and I know every single song back to front.
I can put on Draw the Line by Aerosmith and know every word of it. Can't sing every word of it, but know every word of it.
It's funny, our good friends over at the Hard Rock Show were doing a little thing last week where they were putting 2 albums up every day and you voted which was your favourite. And they were all classics. Fairly easy, they were quite straightforward. You always went, oh yeah, it's that one easy, until Friday, and then they put on Back in Black and The Number of the Beast. And it was like, oh gosh,
that's easy.
How can you pick? It wasn't. It was a very split divide. A
Back
lot
in
of people
Black,
went for...
Because for me, Maiden's the first 2 albums.
Yeah.
That's it. Yeah. Well, that's a question we should put out there then. Who do you consider, out of the sort of obviously the most popular bands in the world, who do you think are overrated?
Ooh.
Oh no, there's a couple in my mind straight away. Like, sadly... Actually, I shouldn't say overrated. It is a band that I've been trying to get into for years and years and years, and it's a band you just touched on just now, Iron Maiden. I've been trying to get into them since I was a kid, and I can't. There's a couple of songs, Fear of the Dark, Number of the Beast, that are like, okay, it's alright, I can get into that, but I can't get into the band. And then I go see them live, and I go, they're a phenomenal band live, but I just can't get into the music.
I think they sort of were one of the first bands to touch on that kind of... And this isn't, if they are hearing this, I don't want to blow my chance of chatting to Adrian or Dave, but they were probably one of the first of the metal bands or hard rock bands that went commercial in a way. It became a big commercial machine with the branding and the website and the video games and all this, and yet they were one of the biggest arguers of commercialism. They used to always be on at Radio 1 for playing rubbish and this and that and this. And then they ended up being this huge global rock machine.
Sometimes it's out of their hands. Yeah. It's just simply just the band just dictates naturally,
It's almost like their shows now are almost like a production, a stage production, rather than, that you look on Setlist FM, every night it's the same songs on the tour for the whole tour, bang, bang, bang.
And it's hard though, isn't it? Because once you get to a certain stage, you get the visuals and you get the lighting, you get everything. So to actually change a song,
it's got to be computer.
Really
it's almost computer-run show. Even more so on this tour that they're showing with the Spitfire coming in and full size. It's just incredible.
It can be done though. I mean, like Metallica, for example, they've got a huge production on their shows, and yet they change their set list every single night. You don't see the same show. I remember I've seen them, followed them around the country in 2010. saw them 16 times on the tour, and every single show was different, and I couldn't believe it. It's like the production was all there, so they were doing something that they could make it flexible in that way, and I think that's what bands make. Like, the biggest complaint for AC/DC when they did their last tour was that there were people following them around, and it was the same show every year. You know, obviously they can't cater for the ones that are following them around, but there is something to be said about hearing songs that you don't necessarily hear a whole lot. You know what I mean?
The Black Crowes, one of my favourite bands, were brilliant for that. I never ever saw them play the same set. I'm not even sure they ever did play the same set.
Which is astounding.
Maybe the first 2 albums they might have done, but they were fantastic for that. When they came to Australia, I followed them around almost everywhere, and there wasn't a single night that was like any other. It was brilliant.
And that's good value for money for the fans, because you do get people want to follow their fans, especially if they haven't seen them for a long time. But yeah, you know that if you saw Maiden in Perth, you'd see them in Melbourne. It'd be the same, just a different arena. I sort of dropped off Maiden after Seventh Son album, and then went back to them in these last few albums. There was a little bit for me where it just fizzled out, but they were great last live show.
Yeah, they're a great live band. I can't doubt them on that. Like, this is, put on a really good show. Bruce still sounds phenomenal after all these years, you know.
And after throat cancer.
Oh yeah, and after all that, it's amazing.
Yeah. No, there's and something I wanted to touch on about the live thing in Perth. We've now started getting, the arena has started certainly attracting more bands back into the Perth scene. We've got these wonderful venues now that are popping up now. The stadium brings us into U2 coming and bands like that. So it opens us up to being back on that international circuit. And it's also down to hotels and facilities. Perth is great for these bands coming in now.
Yeah, but it still doesn't stop it being a day's travel away from everywhere else.
Cost-wise, it's just people don't realise that part of the reason why the bands don't come to Perth is just it's too costly. And if they don't get their money back in ticket sales and stuff, then it's just, it's not viable. They look at the markets before and how well it done before, and if it doesn't do well in the previous tour or the previous 2 tours.
But saying that, you get someone like John Stevens, who absolutely insists on playing country Western Australia, when he could quite easily be over in the eastern states selling out venues 2-3 times as big, and that says a heck of a lot about that man.
Well, we spoke to him last Sunday, and he, Tony, his manager, said that they're not going to sell thousands of tickets on these WA shows, but they'd sold out the first 7 over in the eastern states, and they were playing in front of 250, 300 people here, but they wanted to do it, and they drove everywhere.
Well, if you're going to do WA, you're better off doing as many shows as you can while you're here, just to try and make up those costs, and that's obviously that's what he's doing.
It just shows out there that some bands out there and some people out there are prepared to do that for their fans, where others, it's just a pure financial decision.
I mean, it depends. Obviously, he must have bigger control over that, because sometimes it is the promoters that make that decision, not so much the bands themselves. The bands are just sort of, we'll go wherever we get told to play, Someone like John Stevens, maybe he has more control and go, no, we insist on playing.
Well, I think Tony said he insisted, and when John gets it in his head, that's it.
That's it, Which is good, Sometimes the artist should be controlling. If he reckons he will do well and, make it work.
I think there was about 8 of them travelling in 2 or 3 cars, and they drove everywhere. Esperance, Kalgoorlie, Bunbury. There was no flying between them and venues.
So. He could have, but obviously, that makes sense.
He loves the West. He loves the landscapes. That's good. But something you touched on there about the costs of bands. It was interesting when I spoke to the guy, one of the Kroger brothers from Nickelback, and I said, "You're not coming to Perth this tour." I was hinting at the fact it was that. Was it a money issue, or was it and he said no, it's purely the fact of the venues we wanted to play at weren't available. He said we played at your outdoor stay. It was at the NIB the year before, or the tour before, wasn't available. Perth Glory were playing
when you get a band like Nickelback that size,
it just wouldn't fit into their program.
Those logistics become a little bit more sort of okay. That's really the reason, because they can obviously sell a Perth arena quite well,
And he was pretty honest, because they sold out NIB before. So he said it's just sometimes we've only got that window, and there's no venues available.
Yeah, sometimes that's the case.
And he was quite honest about it.
Yeah. They're a band that gets a lot of flack, but there was an interview that Devin Townsend did, who started to work with the guys in Nickelback, and he had the same preconceived notion of Nickelback being, whatever. And then he found out who they were and what they were doing and stuff, and he changed his mind and said, no, they're actually a great band who know what they're doing. Yeah, you might not like their music, but they're not doing it for any of the reasons you think they're doing it. This is the music they like to play,
Yeah.
So there's an honesty there, I think, that, it is what it is.
That was another one I got nervous. That was only my other two I've had nervous, and that was my first ever interview, Blackstone Cherry and Nickelback. I was just researching and seeing how many albums they'd sold, and how many tours they sell out, and how many people they play in front of, and you suddenly realise that they're in that global elite and still get ridiculed for it. And it's a bit disrespectful, really.
I bet you could safely say that they're having the last laugh.
Oh, of course, definitely.
I remember seeing them support Bon Jovi at Milton Keynes Bowl, and they were the best band on the day. First time I'd seen them, and I was like,
I have to admit, their last album, was it Feed the Machine, I think it was?
It was quite
heavy. It was pretty decent.
Yeah.
It wasn't as bad as... admittedly, I've never heard an entire Nickelback album. I've only heard whatever's been played on the radio or whatever, Sometimes that's the worst thing you can do, because sometimes the best songs are actually outside of the commercial hits,
And Scott Smith did a fantastic review for when they played in Melbourne that was on our site. If you want to have a little look at what they were doing, read the review, because it's there in black and white.
So, one of the questions that we always ask at the Rockpit, one of the ones I designed and asked in my very, very first interview, and we've used it ever since, is the one that I always thought, what's the impossible question to ask someone? And I have about 50 answers to this, and I'm still not sure which one I'd choose. If you could have been a fly on the wall for the creation of any great album, just to see how the magic happened in the studio, what's that album for you?
I mean, there are albums...
We subject everyone to this question.
Yeah, and you can imagine why they... some of them don't have an answer, but... I mean, a lot of them pick out the classics from like the 60s and 70s and stuff. Cause
I think I did a count a year ago, and it was Sgt. Pepper was just shading it over stuff like Led Zeppelin 4 and Back in Black and things like that. But what is it? No Time for Dead Air.
I'd like to have seen one of the Pink Floyd albums, maybe The Wall. The Wall, being a fly on the wall, watching the wall.
Yeah, we'll give you that.
Or Dark Side of the Moon, either of those two.
Yeah. I think, if I'm perfectly honest with you, and Andrew mentioned something about Iron Maiden earlier, is that Pink Floyd are one of those few bands that I don't know how many times I listened to The Wall and Dark Side of the Moon.
I like Dark Side of the Moon.
I still feel a bit sleepy.
It is, but it's one of those things where you have to listen to the album. You can't just pick out tracks. You've got to listen to it from start to finish. It is like a concept album.
Put it on shuffle.
I've enjoyed going to see Roger Waters and the visuals and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, they're a band that just, for me, just doesn't do it.
Yeah.
Too prog. I'm not a big prog fan, I must admit, but I like some aspects of it. But the wall, I don't think many people would disagree with. Yeah.
I don't know. The ones that I would pick out straight away, there's already footage of them because they're more recent. So I'd have to really go back to something where there's no footage of them at all. It'd have to be some of those classic bands like Black Sabbath, or even I'd be intrigued by the Beatles' White Album. What the hell was going on in their minds when they did that album? And I'm sure there was a few helping hands, so to speak. But that's always one that it's intrigued me when I listen to that album. I go, why were they doing this here and stuff like that?
How did they do it? Yeah.
At that time, how did they do it? Because all that stuff there was no digital or nothing. So
it was incredible. And you only had so many tracks, and the more you put on there, the harder it got.
Actually, one that I would pick would be, because there probably wouldn't be anything fascinating. I just love to be just sitting there to see how it all worked. But certainly the Brothers in Arms album from Dire Straits, to see Mark Knopfler. I haven't seen really any much footage of him playing in the studio, so that'd be one I'd probably pick.
Yeah. And once when I asked that question to someone gave me a slightly different answer that you normally get, and instead of them picking a studio album, they chose a live album. They said, "Oh no, actually, I'd have just loved to have been in the audience when such and such was released." And I think at the end of the day, that would probably be my answer as well. There's 2 live albums that I've always loved, and I know that they weren't recorded at one show and stuff like that. But let's suspend
technicalities
for a while. Strangers in the Night, UFO, and Live and Dangerous Thin Lizzy. Now, if I could have been there for the recording of those 2 things in the crowd watching that show, I think they're 2 of the most classic live albums. And I know that they were probably tampered with a bit in the studio as well, so I would have been there for that bit as well. But I mean, for me, music's all about seeing it live and seeing bands play it live, and that's why I can't abide the sort of pop music and stuff you get now, because you know that none of it's live. It's all pre-recorded, and if it is live, it's fed through a synthesizer or a computer or something like that. But there's nothing like being in front of a live band, and so for me, that would be my answer. One of those 2 shows, or one of those 4 or 5 shows, depending on what you read. But,
well, you could only really finish on that question, or of course, the meaning of life.
I could do that.
But we could save that for another one.
Yeah, let's save that for another
because
one.
that question, that's a crazy question to have to answer. That's great.
What is the meaning of life?
You get some really interesting answers. A lot of them, some of them are quite personal and quite deep and meaningful, Then you get some just usual, what is it, the 42, whatever it is, a standard. Yeah.
People of a certain age. Wine, Women and Song. That was Mr. David Coverdale's.
Wine, Women and Song. Well, that was a great bit of an insight into everything about the Rockpit that you guys have been involved in.
Yeah, it's been a great 10 years, and obviously looking to do another 10 more. So.
Yes, and onwards. But certainly last thing to really finish on is to say to everyone, don't forget the shows. Come to support the shows so we can put more of them on.
And if you're out there and you're a band that's listening, send us a video wishing us happy birthday, and we'll put you in our compilation at the end of the year.
Yes.
Especially if you're an absolutely huge band filling stadiums.
Yes, Dave and Adrian.